Game Design 2, Lecture number 5, Segment 4. Let's talk about schema and scaffolding. Schema, what is it? Scaffolding, how do we use it? Well, to answer that question, I'll ask you, what's going on here? Now, I know many of you have played this game. It's pre-patched, so this is a pretty old screenshot. But imagine for just a second that you had never played this game. Maybe it's easier for some of you to imagine than others. Would you be able to tell me what is happening here? Who are you? Well, we know from other first-person shooters that this is probably our portrait down here. And these colorful bars probably have something to do with our health or stamina or energy or magic, what have you. If I were to say, how much ammo do you have? Where's your weapon? You'd probably look down into the other corner and say, well, I have 45 bullets currently loaded out of a 100-round magazine, and maybe these are abilities or reloads or something like that. Looking out into the actual, foreground, I would say that, this is my arm. I've played other first-person shooters, and I know that that thing sticking out from the bottom of the screen is my arm. It's my weapon. If I said, what's the goal of this game? Where would your eyes go? Common place up to the top center of the screen, where we see that currently we're contesting the point. It looks like there are 2 points or maybe a third point. Maybe this is one we own and this is the one we're on. We're 80% of the way to filling it up. What is that point? Well, this is blue and this happens to be this blue border around here, so I'm probably standing within it in this room. But if you haven't played it before, this is where kind of our understanding of what's going on here starts to break down. What am I doing here? When I first looked at this screenshot, I thought that, a la Team Fortress 2, I was the medic and I had some healing beam on this guy out here because of all these pluses coming off of him. What is this thing? What is this dial? I know health, I know ammo. What's this thing in the middle here? And what the heck is this crazy guy doing over there? Who is that and what is he doing? Well, of course, we know now that I'm actually not healing because of the ults, which, by the way, this meter down here measures our ult and how close we are to powering it up. Because of the ult that he is doing, this guy is actually getting energy. If we see the pluses around him, that matches up with the pluses here. So I'm really probably not doing any damage as he's invulnerable and healing his teammate. Again, I'd be able to understand some of this experience, even never having played it, but not all of it. And why is that? It's because all your players come to the table with their own schema, their pre-existing knowledge of games and similar games, say games in the same genre, that they've played before. So things like objectives and weapons and how we switch weapons and movement. I didn't even talk about it, but if I asked you, how do you move in that game? Well, if I'm playing on a keyboard, it's probably WASD with mouse to look and left click to fire. There's nothing that I could have looked at in that screenshot that would have told me that. But players have it in their schema of, hey, this is how I move in a first-person shooter. They're naturally going to gravitate towards it. So the question is, what would happen if you changed what was in the player's schema? What would happen if, for whatever reason, I wanted more keys and I decided to change WASD to ESDF? Right? That's going to be movement. Effectively, what that does is that takes a very common staple, common mechanic, common implementation of a mechanic, movement, and moves it outside of the player's schema. What schema does is it actually helps lessen the learning curve for your players because they know a little something about the game. They don't have to worry about movement or objectives or weapons switching. They can focus on the things unique to your game player experience, like ults and classes and level layouts and any kind of unique weapons or their uses. So generally speaking, we don't want to do this. Another colloquial term would be reinventing the wheel. There's no reason to do it. The wheel works just fine. WASD movement works just fine. I'm not saying you'll never need to do it, but know that your players are going to likely get upset or frustrated, at very least have an increased learning curve because you've taken a tried and true staple of a mechanic and switched it up on them. They most likely won't thank you for it. And what if I asked you what's going on here? That's a little bit even crazier, right? So this is a boss raid fight. It's like third phase of some boss fight in World of Warcraft at the time of the recording of this video. And man, there's just so much going on here. It makes my eyes glaze, and I just kind of check out. There's just too much information here, too much going on outside of my schema to fully grasp what's happening. I've got a bunch of UI mods. I've got a lot of different area of effects going on around players. Those turn into projectiles. Do I want to stand there? Do I want to move? The main character here is a healer, so there's got a whole other kind of sub game of making sure that everybody stays healed. We don't start players here, right? And this is leading into the scaffolding portion, but we have to build our players up to having all of these things in their working repertoire, in their schema, before we just throw it all at them at once. As a rogue starting in WoW vanilla, I had a dagger. I didn't even have energy. I had to go and stab 10 skeletons before they even told me about energy and special moves. Then I'd go use my special moves to stab 10 ghosts. Stabbing ghosts, a little weird, but okay. And then I turned in a quest and they told me about combo points and finishing moves. And it wasn't until I was level 9 that I had these staples of what the rogue class was, energy, combo points, finishers. And, it's not even until level 11 that I'm allowed to do talents and sometime around the same time go into battlegrounds. So Blizzard does a great job of staggering the things that they introduce the player to. Again, we'll talk about that more in just a minute when we talk about scaffolding. But kind of the transition between schema and scaffolding, how do we get things that we are being introduced to while we're practicing into our mastery, from our short-term memory into our long-term memory? And for that, I want to do a little experiment. So listen up, pause YouTube if you're watching it on your second monitor. Pay attention for just a second. Here's a little example we're going to do. We are going to look at some letters in these circles. I'm only going to show them for a moment, and then I'm going to remove them and ask you how many you can remember. So no pausing the video, that's cheating. Here we go. Focus on the screen. See how many you can remember. Ready? Go. Stop. So, can you tell me what this one is? Probably so. How about this one? Maybe. Down here? How many can you remember? Can you remember less than 5? Somewhere between 5 and 9? More than 9? Let's do it again. So here we go. Same letters coming at you. See how many you can remember. Ready? Go. Stop. Cheating? I don't think so. I told you they were same letters. They just happen to be in a different order. So, how many can you remember this time? Probably all of them. But how many discrete items are you actually remembering? Instead of, students, when they do this, they say, I remember 2 rows of 5, but I can't get the third. I remember 4 columns of 3, but I don't have the last 3 in the final column. That's the human brain actually trying to go ahead and start chunking. When we remember books, lights, score, we remember 3 items, not 15 discrete pieces of information. This is how the brain works in processing things in our short-term memory, packing them together so that we can generalize them into a working skill or remember them in our long-term memory. Another example I like to give is any kind of fighting game, where initially as you're playing the fighting game, you're thinking high kick, forward, low kick, roll forward, high kick, back, and low kick at the same time. You're remembering each discrete step. And then you get to, punch, fireball, back, and, sweep. You've learned that fireball is actually 3 discrete motions. It's down, forward, and then forward with a button press. All 4 of those actions become one chunk in your memory. And then it goes even further to where when you're playing at the expert level, it's just, fireball combo, juggling combo, feint, parry, off timing combo, what have you. You are not even thinking about the chunked parts of the combinations. You're just thinking about their use in the current situation. And that chunking is ultimately what leads us to this scaffolding concept. Again, scaffolding is basically another way of describing introduce, practice, master, where we have to build up our players' skills to support future learning and mastery of these skills, and then we can remove that scaffolding after the building is able to stand on its own. A thing like tooltips, when you start playing, you don't know all the controls, we get these tooltips. That's a scaffolding mechanic so that the player can learn as they go. How annoying would it be if the tooltips continued for the entire game? It's like, I got it. I know what this button does. I've hit it 17,000 times. I no longer need the tooltip that, A is jump. But it's an important mechanic to have in there while players are learning it. I was talking before about when I started as a rogue in WoW. There's another example I'd like to give, which is when I tried to play EVE online. Me personally, if you read the feature list of EVE, super nerdy sci-fi, you don't even have to fight. You can just make money by being an intergalactic trader, running resources from one galaxy to another, guilds, player versus player, all this stuff. Like, I should have loved it. Nerd paradise, I should have been into it. But I started it and I tried to play it, and it was the learning curve of a brick wall. Remember back to the flow diagram, which I've referenced several times this month. It was all challenge and not enough skill building. I was frustrated, and it did not elevate me into that flow state, that flow channel. Same thing will happen if you don't properly scaffold your mechanics to your players. You don't let them practice the skills long enough in order to master them before you introduce more. So that was the point of the chunking slide. Is if you look, most human brains can work with somewhere between 5 and 9 new pieces of information in their working memory at any given time. Anything over 9 typically, and the next thing in pops the first one out. So 5 is typical. I love to recommend to students go with the rule of 3. 3 new things at any given time, and let them master at least one of those before you introduce additional skills. That's what enables the scaffolding. That's what enables us to do proper IPM, introduce, practice, and mastery. So one other example of scaffolding that I'll give will be Super Mario Brothers, where if we just look at level 1-1, here are the first things that I encounter in the first 10 seconds of level 1-1 of Super Mario Brothers. We've got movement, jumping, hitting blocks, death Goombas, and mushrooms. Now, I'm not talking about the tutorial. Do you remember the tutorial for Super Mario? Yeah, you don't, because there was no tutorial. The tutorial was go. Let's see what you do. And you sit there and you're like, I just got this NES for Christmas, and there's a mushroom walking at me. I wonder what's going to, I die. I just learned something about Goombas and death. So now I run at him, and I'm like, I'm going to hit him. Oh, nope, I ran into him. I died. So I eventually have to learn that by pressing the button, I jump, and if I land on him, I might be able to kill him. And there's this big flashing question mark. So I hit it with my head because that's all I can do. And out comes a mushroom and I get big. So I learned that I want mushrooms. It's just the first 10 seconds of the game. So from there to the about 26-second mark, I learn about these other things. Pipes, invisible blocks, where I'm trying to jump over a pipe. And all of a sudden, bing, I get a coin or I get a 1-up mushroom. Now I'm looking all over the place. The first time that you press on a pipe and you go down it, now you're checking all the pipes to see if you can go down and get bonus coins. Pits. How did you learn that pits killed you? You jumped in one. There was no tooltip that said, hey, don't jump down here, you'll die. It was just part of the scaffolding, introducing you to the mechanics of Super Mario. You jump down here, you die, you go back to start. Then there's this hitting from under. And I find it fascinating the way that games, including Super Mario here, introduce some of these new skills in what I'm going to call kind of an inherent or an organic way. If you remember, in 1-1, you came across this scene right here, where you had already been introduced to the fact that you want to hit question blocks with your head. So when you scroll onto this part of level 1-1, you go to do what you've already practiced doing, this skill that you are mastering of getting everything that comes out of question blocks, and they just so happen to line up a Goomba So he's on top of that question block when you hit it with your head. It's not coincidental. The game designers did this very deliberately to let you kind of naturally and experimentationally be introduced to this new mechanic, this new skill. And then you learn, oh, it's not just question blocks, but if I hit from under any enemy, almost any enemy, it's going to kill him. And some enemies, that's the only way to kill them, little armored spiky guys. So interesting to me, from 27 seconds to the end, we get multiple coin blocks. Oh, I can keep hitting this thing with my head. Koopa stars, end flag. And that's a good majority of the entirety of Super Mario Brothers mechanics. I mean, yeah, there's these other things as well, but just looking at those first 3 scaffolds, that is a lot of the core mechanics that you're going to need for the remainder of the game. And it's important to note here that in level 1-1, what they did not require the player to do is run, full speed, jump, bounce off of a flying Koopa, avoid a fire stick, land on a single wide block, jump again, bounce off of a bullet bill, and end up on a moving platform. That would have been way too difficult. They had not practiced the skills needed in order to master that challenge yet. However, that's exactly what they ask you to do in level 7-2, after the player has had time to generalize these skills into a mastery state. Again, if we were to diagram it on the flow diagram, we gradually increase challenge, let the player up their skill, challenge skill, working them into that flow diagram. Doing too much too quickly, like EVE Online did for me, it just spikes them into the frustration zone, and they end up rage quitting more times than not. So scaffolding and schema, know it. Next, we're going to do a quick example. We're going to look at a video created by Zach Highwiller, the author of your textbook, that goes through Portal and how they do their tutorial in a very clever way. So stay tuned. Thanks for watching.